Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank both Adrian and Greg for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll be covering sort of the drought situation over the last year and a half or so here in the United States. Greg mentioned I'm with the National Drought Mitigation Center. I'm a climatologist here and one of the producers of the U.S. Drought Monitor and the North American Drought Monitor. And we'll hear later from my colleague Martin and the efforts on the side of Mexico. Just to give you a brief introduction about the National Drought Mitigation Center, we've been around since 1995, so all we deal with is drought. We're pretty much drought all the time, which is a little unique, whereas in SMN and others, they have to worry about all the hazards. We get to focus on drought. So our main goal is to help people prepare for drought in advance of it in order to reduce the risk. This is just to give people out there a feel for the countries we've worked with over the last 5 to 7 years internationally. So our center, even though it's the National Drought Mitigation Center, we've worked with folks and scientists and policy makers and decision makers all around the world. So last year, really there was a focus on these 5 main areas around the world that experienced pretty severe drought. And in some of these areas, the drought is still persisting. So we're going to focus today on the drought that we share between the United States and Mexico. In my talk, I'll focus on that. So these were just some of the headlines that we saw in the media last year that focused on how big of impact drought has. And oftentimes, it's the most costly of the hazards out there, but doesn't quite get the attention it deserves, typically because in a lot of times we don't have the results right away. It takes a year or sometimes longer just to determine exactly what the final dollar amount was in loss of livelihood or worst case scenario, loss of life to livestock and or people in the case of famine. Depends on where you are in the world.
Mark?
Yes.
We are having some difficulties. We don't see any of your slides. So what I'm going to do is put your slide presentation from my computer, if you don't mind.
Okay. It does say I'm sharing my monitor, but we'll go ahead and do what we need to do.
Thank you. So now
when you get into my PowerPoint, I'll be on the slide that's for the North American Drought Monitor. That would be slide number 6.
This one. Yeah. Okay. So you just let me know when you need to change that.
Okay. So are we on slide number 6 right now, Adrian?
Yes.
Okay. Gracias. Okay. So this was the latest. This is the most current drought monitor map for North America. It just came out here last week. It's done monthly. In the United States, we work on a weekly product like this called the U.S. Drought Monitor, and we work with our colleagues at CONAGUA and SMN to produce a monthly map for North America. So it's obvious from this slide, we can see really along the border, all the way from Texas to Southern California, we can see a pretty severe drought across all of these states right now as we head into 2012. And it's in our most severe classes as well. Both the red and the dark red there, D3, D4, are very intense droughts. Okay, the next slide, I'll focus on the bottom here just a little bit, and my colleague Martin will surely focus on the impacts to Mexico. But obviously in the United States, and I'll show it on the next graphic, this has been an expensive drought. It's going to accumulate and exceed over $10 billion US. And I'll highlight some of the major impacts, particularly with regard to fire, to the environment, and to water supply. The next slide shows sort of the area of coverage here. In the United States last year, looking at this long-term historical graph on the bottom, we had $12 billion disasters in the United States last year, by far the most active year since the National Climatic Data Center has been tracking hazards. And one of the most expensive ones was the Southern Plains Southwest drought, which you can see here covers all of the Mexico-United States border region. Next slide. It wasn't just an issue of the lack of precipitation, but also the issue of intense heat. This graphic shows the number of days where we exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see some large areas all the way where you would expect them, sort of in the desert Southwest, but also over into the Rio Grande region of Texas. This was an abnormally large amount of days greater than 100 degrees. In fact, over 2 months or more accumulated days, which is well above normal. So this had a real stress effect on the environment, livestock, and people. The next slide shows some information that was taken from our Drought Impact Reporter database, and I'll show a slide later where you can go look at that tool. In fact, there's been discussions about could we transfer this technology and tool and database between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, for example. So a little bit more on that later. But here you can see we have a pie chart on the top graphics showing sort of how we broke down the impacts last year. And you'll see the biggest slice of the pie is the green one there for agriculture. And I would say out of that agriculture, a large portion of that was actually livestock driven. There was some issues with irrigation allocations for cotton and some other crops maybe in Texas, but in large part, a lot of this has to do with loss of livestock, reducing the herds for livestock, trying to find additional supplemental feed for livestock. So that was a big portion of that. The rest is the second biggest chunk of the pie, as you'll see there, is fire. And fires are a real issue and will continue to be an issue this year, although hopefully not in as a large capacity due to reduced fire load because of the lack of vegetation. In our graphic on the bottom kind of tracks the amount of impacts we've reported over the last 6 years since the Drought Impact Database was built back in 2005. And so while it might not look like 2011 was a large year compared to, say, 2007, the difference is in 2007, the amount of area under drought was double that of what we saw in 2011. 2011 was really focused around Texas, Arizona, and the southeast. So a smaller area, but intense. So the next slide shows sort of an update on where we are going into 2012. As I already touched on the last slide, our key impacts are on concerns are on rangeland, fire, followed by wildlife, both from a fowl standpoint of wetlands, the lack of migration on the birds, as well as invasion of wildlife coming in to find water and or food in urban areas along these regions. Water allocation for irrigation is going to be sparse this year. That's going to be a problem. And we've already seen issues with dust storms this year in the windy transition period to spring. Between winter and spring and summer, the windy time of year is obviously causing problems already with dust storms. So I will say, though, given that it was a La Nina winter, we expected it to be much worse. We thought it would be a warmer, drier winter, and in fact what happened, some other things influenced the pattern that we were able to get sufficient moisture for some parts of New Mexico and Texas. So they've improved a little bit, whereas Arizona and California has not. So we've seen some improvement when we thought we would see no improvement. So I guess that's the good news. Bad news is it's a pretty bad situation out there. Snowpack situation that feeds both the Colorado River and the Rio Grande Basin are a little bit different. The snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas for California and the Wasatch in Utah are pretty poor right now. And I will show a graphic here in just a minute that shows that it's a little better off in the headwaters of the Rio Grande that we'll see here on the next slide, I believe. So the next slide shows the map, and you can see in Arizona, New Mexico, while not a great year by any means, it's a lot better than what we saw for what's going to feed the upper Colorado Basin and what will feed Northern California. There we're seeing very, very low, historically low snowpack, The only thing saving us a little bit was that last year was a very good year. So most of the reservoirs are full, but they're really holding on to that water to make sure they can get squeeze enough out of it as we go into the dry summer season. The next slide shows the weekly U.S. Drought Monitor dated February 28. Here we still see in the Big Bend area of the Rio Grande a large area of D3 and D4, the most intense classification of drought in western Texas, southeastern New Mexico, and then severe drought across most of southern New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Southern California in the D1 category. So there's still this situation where we've seen some improvement relative to the past, but it's still pretty bad. If we go to the next slide, we will show you that story I was trying to paint earlier, where the bottom two graphics show the improvement on the calendar year in the bottom left and the water year on the bottom right. And in the bottom right, you can see in parts of eastern Texas, they've improved in the drought monitor anywhere from 3 to 4 categories. So that's a very good improvement as we head into 2012. So again, very unexpected, but very welcome. Same for New Mexico, western New Mexico, southern New Mexico, 2 to 3 class improvement in the drought over the winter thus far. The next slide just focuses on California. The desert region of California there we're showing in D0 and D1. I want to move forward to the next slide. For time purposes, though, this focuses on Arizona. Arizona is one of those states where 3 months ago, about 72% of the state was in drought. And as of last week, we're up to almost 92% of Arizona in drought. More importantly, 40% of the state is in severe drought or worse. So, again, Arizona has been getting a little worse, while if we go to the next slide for New Mexico, it looks pretty bad there. But if you compare it to 3 months ago, we've seen some slight improvement in the amount of drought in New Mexico. So there's been some improvement, but there's still a pretty good drought entrenched there going into March. The next slide shows Texas, and as I showed earlier, that western Texas along the Rio Grande still in a very, very bad situation, even though East Texas has really improved a lot. So most of the worst part of the drought is focused right along the border between Texas and Mexico, so that's not good heading into 2012. Okay, I want to just spend 2 slides on the drought monitor. The next slide kind of gives you an idea of how we do this. And so the same method sort of applies to the cooperation between Mexico and Canada. This is just for the U.S. Drought Monitor. It's a cooperative effort between our Meteorological Service, our Department of Agriculture, and the National Drought Mitigation Center. And we've been doing this since 1999. I think what makes it unique, though, is that it's shared. It's a collaborative effort. Our 11 authors split between those 3 entities I described. I think the other unique factor, though, is that we have around 325 people on the ground, including people like Greg there in Arizona, who give us feedback. The State Drought Monitoring Task Force give us feedback and help us refine the map each week. This slide shows the importance of that local expert input. And so of the 325 participants, roughly a third of those, or a little over 100, are from states or universities like the University of Arizona. So here you can see samples of the various products from Arizona, Texas, from New Mexico that help supplement our national data feeds. The next slide shows a different approach we're trying to take in the country called the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. NIDIS is trying to take a basin approach, drought early warning system, where we started to develop early warning systems by basin instead of by state. And it started in the upper Colorado, moved over into the southeast in the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint, or ACF short, and now we've moved back over to the Four Corners Tribal region, the Four Corners region, and California, which is just now spinning up this year, are coming online. So it's a little different approach, but so far it's been, I think, a good approach. Drought Monitor used? How do we leverage the Drought Monitor to be used in policy, that policy science interface? It wasn't that way when we started, but the goal was to heighten the visibility and awareness of drought. And so now, in 2008, it was incorporated into our Farm Bill. So our emergency relief is tied to the Drought Monitor through the Farm Bill. The media has really picked it up. It's used on the Weather Channel. It's used in all of our major newspapers and other media throughout the country. And it's used to brief both our Congress, our governors, and our president. Okay, so the other way it's been used, I don't have time to go into all these programs, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture handles most of the drought relief programs to producers of livestock and or crops. And this is just a list of the various ways it's been done. So I think my last slide, I'll skip forward to the final thoughts on drought impacts and the importance of monitoring these, is that all droughts have an impact and start locally, even if they have an impact globally. So where we're vulnerable to droughts, impacts become the face of drought for us. And as I mentioned up top on the front of my call, they're the leading cause of economic loss on average each year. So impact collection must be a very important part of our drought early warning systems or our monitoring efforts. And that's why we built the Drought Impact Reporter, which you can find by Googling Drought Impact Reporter or going to the URL there called droughtreporter.unl.edu. The last slide shows an interface to that where you can find, this is what we've talked with our colleagues in Canada and Mexico, if this is transferable. Skipping forward to the last slide, the last thing I'll mention before turning it over to the host is that actual North American Drought Monitor Forum will be hosted by CONAGUA and SMN this year in Cancun, April 8 through 21. And so I'll let Martin speak to that in just a little bit. But this is where we'll come together to talk about drought as an issue in both Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And with that, last slide just shows my contact information for future follow-up. Thank you very much.
Hey. Thank you very much. Now we very fast we're going for the next presenter, Martin Ibarra. Okay.
Okay, thank you for everybody. You hear me?
I think you need to increase the volume.
Okay. The presentation is on the screen. Are you watching this?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome. So this is Martin Ibarra. Because right now all the team of Drought in Mexico is here in the office. Adelina Albañil, Reynaldo Pascual, people from that works with Martin Montero, Mercedes, and Minerva. So it's all the team that is working the topic of drugs in Mexico. So do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Next slide. So we are going to talk about the drug monitoring in Mexico. So this is a function of the structure in the division of climate forecasting. So this is an activity that we do all the month. So I'm going to show some backgrounds about the drought in Mexico. So mostly we start to work with drought monitoring topic with the North American Drought Monitor. So Mark Svoboda is a counterpart from the U.S., and for us, it's very glad to work with all the teams that from Canada and United States. So we start to work with Drought Monitor in 22 years with a project, a collaboration project between the United States of America and Canada and Mexico, and is denominated Drought Monitor, North American Drought Monitor. The goal is to monitor and depict cartographically the intensity and spread of drought in Mexico. For this, we use different indicators and indexes. So we update this product every month. So Adelina and Reinaldo and Minerva, since 2 weeks before the drought products are updated, they start to work in order to have the better information to do these products. So this is an effort of different institutions from NOAA, the Department of Agriculture, the Environment and Canada institution. So we belong to the National Water Commission in Mexico. Next slide. So the next slide, we would like to explain the tools that we are using to do the monthly monitoring in Mexico. So we use different products, mainly, as you say in the map of the anomaly of precipitation. Okay, in the left upper corner of the screen. So with this, sorry. Okay, this is a product that we use in order to diagnostic the drought in condition in Mexico. As you say, this is for an example. For example, for the month last July 2010 year. So with brown colors, you can see the areas where the rain is less than normal conditions, and you can see the green areas where they have rain precipitation above normal conditions. So we use another indexes that are provided by NOAA and NCDC and other institutions, like index standardized index. The SPI is another product that we use. Another one is the percent of long-term average precipitation, 1 month. The health vegetation index is another product that we use from NOAA. The humidity anomaly is another product that is estimated in the soils, and the anomaly of evaporation, as well as the anomaly of runoff that is estimated by satellite techniques. So we use the temperatures that are measured here in Mexico. So as you can see, we depend from a lot of products that comes from another institutions, from NOAA mainly. The next slide. So with other products like Palmer Drought Index, Palmer Hydrological Drought Index, Palmer C Index. So all the products that we use for diagnostic the drought condition in Mexico. So you can see the map in the lower corner of the presentation. This map shows the distributions of stations that we are using to do the diagnostic of drought condition. As you can say, there are some holes in the north of Mexico where there are not stations by which we can support some information about droughts, as well as in the center, in the regional center of Mexico, in Zacatecas, San Luis Potosí, and in the south of Mexico, for example, in Guadalajara, in Jalisco, Guerrero, Oaxaca, and some regions of southeast of Mexico, like Chiapas. So most of the drought conditions are presented, as you know, in the north of Mexico and in the center of Mexico. Next slide. Sorry. Okay, so just right now, on this year, people, the authorities of Mexico, like President's Office of Mexico, require us most products. Is not enough sufficient to have monthly products. They are asking us weekly products. So we explain them that we depend of most of the products that comes from NOAA, but we are doing an effort in order to produce seminal products here in Mexico, weekly products here in Mexico. As you can say, with the infrastructure of SMN, the idea is to produce the NDBI index here in Mexico. We are talking with some other divisions of here in National Weather Service in order to generate this product weekly. So we hope that in terms of 3 months or 4 months, we can get this kind of product to Mexico. The idea is that if we can strong the efforts with the U.S. and other institutions of the U.S., like maybe Arizona University, we can get this kind of information in order to improve our products. Okay, the next slide. The next slide shows a seasonal outlook about the drought condition in Mexico. So on this division, we update every month the seasonal forecasting for precipitate. For example, you are watching the next precipitate and the next forecasting for March, April, and May. As you can see, most of the north of Mexico, northwest, and California, we are hoping that this region receives less precipitation than normal conditions. So the next months are going to be very difficult for Mexico, where we think that. So next slide. So this is all that we have. So as there are other, with this information that we provide, some other institution in Mexico supports their activities. For example, in the north of Mexico, the CONAGUA started to support for agricultural areas. They start to do more permission in order to have more drawouts. So, and in order to the agriculture in the north of Mexico is not impacted. So there are other institutions, for example, that provide food, water for people that live in inaccessible areas. So the information that we provide, they use in order to support for people in that areas. We need to establish support an alert warning in order to take decisions that help to mitigate the impact of drought in the north of Mexico. So this is maybe Adelina and Reynaldo, we can say more about this. Reynaldo, I don't know if you have to say something more. Adelina? Okay, we have. Well, wait a moment, please. Wait a minute, please. So we are going to show some slides that show the impacts of droughts in Mexico. So the authorities are very worried about the forecasting for drought in the north of Mexico, mainly to support the agricultural decisions and social programs that support people in that area. So something that we are planning to get support from agricultural areas and forestry areas in order that they send to us the impacts of droughts in Mexico. Nowadays, we are doing a great effort in order to get information of great areas. However, we need more specifically information about the impacts. So the idea is that the agricultural federal agencies and civilian protection, they can provide that information in order to improve the drought monitor in Mexico. As Mark said, we are planning to do the next meeting of North American Drought Monitor in Cancun, next April 18, 19, and 20 in Cancun. So you are invited in order to be with us. Adrian, maybe you can go here, or maybe something that are here this presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we are just in time. We still have 20 minutes to start this session of answer questions. So I'm gonna return the assign to. Okay. All right. So you wanna read? Okay, this is now the open session of questions and answers. So, who has a question?
Sí, es que hay una conferencia de sequía con los de Arizona. Invitan a Martín.
We're asking you to type your questions into the chat window if you have a question.
Si quieren hacer una pregunta, lo pueden hacer en el chat.
Adrián, yo tengo una pregunta.
Oye,
quizá para que nos des mayor luz aquí al grupo. ¿Cuál es la idea, cuál sería la idea de nuestra participación? Nosotros somos un grupo que estamos haciendo aquí la cuestión del monitoreo de la sequía en México, básicamente compuesto por 2 a 3 personas. Bueno, es un esfuerzo muy grande. En términos de participar en este grupo, ¿cuál piensan ustedes que puede ser nuestra colaboración?
Yeah, Martin, what he's saying is that Martin wants to know what could be the participation of CONAGUA and SMN in this initiative, and they're asking what is the nature of this initiative. So I'm going to try to answer that. We are focused in the border region. We believe that the border region is one of the most important places that somehow at the same time that it's so important economically. We also share a lot of the environmental problems regarding climate. So the border climate, as a concept, as part of the program Climas, they want to unify the efforts in both sides of the border. Entonces, contestando la pregunta, Martín, creemos que una colaboración de este tipo binacional está justo ahora en la parte más importante para llevarla a cabo. Y nosotros queremos ser ese vínculo, ayudar a la comunicación. Y como puedes ver, el potencial de colaboración es inmenso. Pero se requiere de un canal de comunicación como como una serie de webinars, como estableciendo algunos canales de comunicación que están en los medios sociales, de social media, y mantener este vínculo. Por eso nosotros desarrollamos este programa de distintos webinars que se van a llevar a cabo mes tras mes. Our intention is to continue this effort for, for a year at least, to bring to the people that are interested, stakeholders, scientists, the general public, to participate in this kind of webinars. And every month, we're going to present a different theme, a different topic. Today is drought, but next, at the end of this month, is going to be something about institutions and programs that are focused in adaptation. So the main focus is basically provide tools and provide knowledge to stakeholders. They can use them, but mainly is to keep going the communication between the two sides of the same page, that is the border region. And we're going to be more specific during the following days and weeks, because this is part of the experience. We are making this happening and at the same time improving, and we will provide more information. So I don't know if Greg wants to add something about it.
The only thing that I would add to what Adrian just mentioned is that we want to foster better communication. We want to have, we want to learn about what kinds of data and information flows will help people in decision making, and also just to build a community that that has better knowledge of the scientific initiatives and also the impacts of climate and projected impacts of climate change in our two countries.
And just finally, just a little kind of update. We were practicing a little bit about this, the connection with using the webinar and this software. And actually, we have a very interesting conversation with Martin Montero that this should be a channel, a way to increase, to highlight and increase the communication. And probably we're going to end up with a very nice collaborative project in the future. So that's basically the idea. ¿Más preguntas? More questions?
Adrian, here for Mexico, I
yes?
think that it would be very useful if we will have a forum in which every month we can discuss the climate conditions oriented to forecast the drought conditions and what are the general climate conditions that explain the current droughts. So I think that it would be a very good for meeting for us. So and another thing that is that maybe with strong collaboration with another institutions from like you, we can, in terms of agreement, you can provide some products to us, in order to support the stakeholders' decisions. So it will be very great for us. I don't know, what do you think?
Okay, we're taking notes here. Greg is taking notes. Thank you. More questions from the other participants? Question for Mark or specific to Martin?
So Martin, I think that's an excellent idea. This idea of having a forum to discuss the climate conditions and forecasts. And I'm wondering, is that something that you do in putting together the North American Drought Monitor?
Greg, was that question for me or for Martin?
For Martin.
For Martin, but I have an answer to. Actually, we realized, Mark, that you mentioned this, and Martin mentioned just also during his presentation. You are collaborating, and actually, I'm sure you're going to be together in Cancun and have more projects. And great question is that this initiative wants to be joined in the North American Drought Monitor umbrella. That's the question, or if there is a potential to be a different line of collaboration that is more specific about the border region. What we want to do in this exercise is kind of have a brainstorming here. At the same time, we're answering some questions, also bring some ideas, and start new venues of collaboration too. So I don't know, Mark, if you have some ideas about it.
Well, I very much think it's needed. I think informally, we end up sort of doing that trans-boundary, how should I say this, with the lack of the data along the border on both sides of the country. A lot of times that's a very difficult job for us to get the map right along the border. So the border always ends up being where we spend the most time sort of collaborating with our colleagues in Mexico and Canada. Same issue in Canada, same issue in the United States when you lack the data. So what we end up doing each month is that's where most of the discussion is. Well, what are you seeing outside of the border in this part of the country? And so a lot of our time is sort of collaborating along the border. So as it turns out, that's the other provinces and states south of the border, they've got a pretty good feel on, and so you don't hear as much discussion. But I would say there's a potential to do that, but we don't do any formal webinar each month. It's sort of done by email through the list server.
Yeah, well, this is something that we could try out and see whether it works. I think the other thing that's valuable here is, or potentially valuable, is really for us to learn what's better done in this kind of format using a webinar, as opposed to things that we can send through email or post online. And just really, for us to learn about the added value of having an exchange using this kind of medium.
Para nuestros amigos en México, ustedes pueden ver el potencial que tiene que pudiéramos hacer esto mensualmente, cada mes, o tal vez mantenernos en comunicación vía email, pero yo lo que he discutido con Greg con bastante frecuencia es que el uso de webinars podría traer también la discusión en vivo que muchas veces no se tiene a través de email. Y aunque ahorita fue una presentación formal, podemos diseñar fácilmente y rápidamente un método para tener talleres, workshops online, en adición con la información sobre sequía. Algo así como lo que hicimos hoy. Tenemos dos presentaciones, ambos son sobre forecasting en la región de la frontera, de pronóstico, y luego entablar este tipo de conversación que estamos llevando a cabo de discusión. ¿Qué técnicas, qué comunicación necesitamos enviar a los usuarios, a los stakeholders, y poder establecer esta comunicación de una manera continua para mantener la información fluyendo en ambos lados de la frontera y estar preparados? Porque el fin de este tipo de iniciativas es preparar mejores herramientas de adaptación en la región. Es muy importante eso porque, podemos discutir las partes técnicas del pronóstico y de poder establecer proyecciones a futuro, pero si esto no se lleva a cabo, no se baja hacia los usuarios y a los tomadores de decisiones, pues creo que vamos a estar siempre en una especie de burbuja. Así que yo creo que lo más importante aquí es brindar esta información para crear y mejorar herramientas de adaptación. I don't know if you follow that, Mark, but I think it's one of my best speeches in a long time.
It sounded great.
Yeah, you were great. But basically, the idea is that all these kind of conversations and tools be used by stakeholders in order to increase the capacity, adapting capacity in the border region.
Un comentario. Es muy importante lo que estás comentando y bueno, va muy pegado de los requerimientos de los usuarios acá del sector agropecuario, principalmente el sector forestal. Hablando de adaptación, yo creo que es muy importante definir esos periodos, ¿no? O sea, por ejemplo, ¿qué nos enfrentamos para el próximo año en términos de sequía? Por ejemplo, si la sequía que sufrimos con Estados Unidos y en México desde el 2010, o sea, se pudo haber prevenido, ¿no? O sea, ¿cuáles son esos indicadores que nos puedan ayudar a tomar esas tomas de decisiones y apoyar políticas? Creo que sería bueno una discusión que nos orienten hacia esos puntos. Y bueno, también hacer la mención de que nosotros vemos aquí la sequía desde un punto muy general a nivel nacional. Tendríamos que fortalecer acciones con las regionales de la CONAGUA, preparar personas, gente también, para que se vayan haciendo inmersos en esta cuestión de la sequía, lo que es su evaluación y su seguimiento y su pronóstico. Y bueno, les hacemos una invitación para que nos estén con nosotros allá en Cancún, 18, 19 y 20 de abril. Si alguien de ustedes puede estar con nosotros y darnos una conferencia, sería muy bueno, están cordialmente invitados, Adrián. Si tienen algún material de exposición o ir a presentar un stand, también si ustedes nos lo hacen saber, lo podemos apoyar.
Excelente. Una pregunta, ¿y tú crees que haya un espacio durante esta reunión como para conectarnos, solamente para saber si tú crees que valdría la pena? Porque esto es en abril y nos da tiempo como para armar un webinar conectados directamente con el Congreso.
Sí, adelante, son bienvenidos, lo podemos programar.
Ok, bueno, pues yo creo que ya estamos a punto de cerrar. Quiero, a nombre de Greg, agradecerles muchísimo que hayan hecho el esfuerzo de conectarse. Realmente es estimulante. Ustedes se están dando cuenta que esto es un esfuerzo que se está haciendo sobre la marcha y mejorando cada vez. Y entonces vamos a estar en contacto. Ustedes, todos los que están ahorita, ya están en una lista para ser notificados para el próximo webinar, que va a ser a finales de marzo. Entonces, si pudieran asistir, sería fabuloso. Y vamos a mantener la comunicación, mandándoles el aviso ahora sí, por lo menos 2 semanas de anticipación, para no andar con las prisas. Y por favor, si tienen preguntas, if you have suggestions, if you want to make further questions, just drop an email, and we'll happy to try to answer those questions. And I'm sure Mark, he will be very kind to also to provide some feedback if we receive a specific question for him.
You bet, absolutely.
Thank you very much. So, muchas gracias y estamos en contacto. You're gonna send an email about the future events, but particularly the next webinar that is going to be at the end of this month. Thank you very much. And if you want to add something.
No, I just want to thank Adrian for arranging all of this and getting all of the software together, all of the speakers. He did a great job, and this has been a really great conversation.
It could be better. It would be better. Okay. Adiós. Muchas gracias. Un abrazo a todos. Hugs for everyone.
Adiós.
Un abrazo.
Gracias.